And welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Peter Russell. How are you, Peter?
I'm fine, thank you. Good to be here with you.
Good, good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm eager to speak with you. And just in the way of an introduction, Peter, you're an author, teacher, and a speaker. You're recognized as one of the leading thinkers on consciousness and contemporary spirituality. You've got your books out, which is The Global Brain, Waking Up in Time, and From Science to God. You've studied theoretical physics, experimental psychology, and computer science at the University of Cambridge, and meditation and Eastern philosophy in India. And then you are also a fellow at IONS, which is the Institute of Noetic Sciences. So welcome aboard.
Great, thank you.
So first I wanted to ask you, with IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Now, this was something that Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and for those who want to know, he was, I believe, the sixth person to walk onto the moon with Apollo 14. And I think it was on his way back where he had an introspective revelation upon, looking through the capsule window, seeing the Earth, Moon, and the Sun sort of all line up. And that sort of, gave him a very powerful feeling. And then his goal was to, sort of blend physics or science with spirituality, which is much needed because, I often feel that we're well ahead in terms of technology, but then, something as important as spirituality, it should also, try to be measured. Even though we start off with spirituality with no sort of formal measurement, it's always good to measure it so we can understand it, better. So I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on, the Institute of Noetic Sciences and, what we're trying to do today with sort of like the work over there?
Yeah, I think it's a unique organization. You're right, it was founded by Edgar Mitchell. And part of his realization was looking at Earth. He realized, it was one planet. It was one single planet with one single race, human race. And yet we were making a mess of it. And he saw that the answer was a shift in consciousness. And so you're right, when he came back, he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences as a way of exploring consciousness, exploring the mind, to see how we could open that up more, become more awake, more aware. And it's run a number of different projects over the years, different interests. It has an educational function. It puts out newsletters, it runs courses, it does research. It did a lot of research on psychoimmunology, neuroimmunology many years back, which is like the immune system. It's done a lot of work on interesting areas in ESP in terms of whether we're aware of like the immediate present or past, a few seconds out, things like that. Various projects. And it has it runs projects for schools as well. It has an educational arm. So that's basically, I think it's probably unique. It's the only institute I know that's really been exploring consciousness for what, 50 years now. Yes, it's 50 years. I think it was 73 it was founded.
Oh, wow. And how far along have we come with the research now, say in 50 years? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, so much has happened. I mean, as much as the research, it's also just the awakening of human consciousness in general. I mean, where we were 50 years ago, meditation was regarded as very, very woo-woo. There's very little interest in this. You could find a few specialist bookstores and things. And now it's become mainstream. I mean, everybody is aware in one way or another of this, whether it's even just taking up yoga or meditation practices. But at the same time, we've done a lot of much deeper research into, what happens in the body, the nervous system in meditation, how we can improve that. I mean, it's so much, and it's not just the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I think many other places around the world have been working in this direction. So it's a rapidly expanding field. And I think probably the most important field, as Edgar Mitchell realized, this is what is needed on the planet, is knowing how to facilitate the awakening of human consciousness.
And I like that you say it's important because, too often I think we get caught up with technology that is material, but really it's the immaterial, which, at some point sources or stems from the material that is important to measure, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, we get caught up in the technology and the material world, but it's also clear that, what we're doing with the material world is not working out very well very often. We're causing a lot of damage. And all of that, all that's going wrong in one way or another, comes back to human decisions, human thinking, human values. And so it comes back to human consciousness, basically. And so we need to really explore human consciousness and see how we can liberate human consciousness in order to know how to use and manage our technology properly.
And is it fair to say that, like you're saying, a lot of the troubles we have with the material world, is it because of, those, who are in powers to be, sitting at the helm on top, they haven't spent time reflecting on, the subject of consciousness? Because, including myself and the people I've met that have spent time reflecting on the subject of consciousness, the trajectory of their life is very much different. They're not into sort of materialistic things or short-term gains. They look at it with a very layered and, wider angle lens.
Yes, but I'm hesitant to put, blame anywhere in particular. I mean, certainly what you're saying is true. I mean, if we had enlightened leaders, I think they'd be making different decisions. If spiritually enlightened leaders be making different decisions. But I think it's also a reflection of the whole of human culture. I mean, it's not just the leaders, but it's our consumer society that's so busy buying things, wanting things, consuming, which is consuming resources and adding to the pollution. So it's also a reflection of our whole consumer culture, which the companies, etc. Basically, they're feeding, but they're promoting it as well. But I'm not talking about you and I necessarily individually or the listeners individually, but we as a collective are at fault too in buying into this whole materialistic culture.
Got it, got it. And that's fair to say also because, if we speak of something like the government, the people often like to complain about the government, but really the government is comprised of, the people themselves, right? So
Right.
it's like looking in the mirror, reflecting back at you.
Right. I mean, how many of us have zero footprint on the earth? It's almost impossible. I mean, virtually impossible unless you're, living out in the woods self-sufficiently or something, and there's a movement towards driving more efficient vehicles or electric vehicles or whatever it is and not consuming so much. So there is that movement, but almost inevitably in our society we can't but help be contributing to it. So the challenge, I think, for each of us is how do we reduce our footprint, our ecological footprint?
Got
We
it.
can't
Okay.
get it to zero, but I think we can reduce it. That's the challenge.
Yes. Now, if we're speaking of consciousness, I want to ask you, the infinite dollar question or the quantum dollar question. What is consciousness? And a long time ago, I think it was on YouTube, I saw someone explain it saying that it's almost like a flashlight, that sort of beams the light towards an object, and how powerful that beam of light is. The intensity of the light is the nature or the level of your consciousness. So I almost sort of might want to whittle it down to consciousness is the awareness of awareness. Am I on the right track, or what is your definition with all the work
Yes.
you've done?
Part of the challenge here is we use the words in different ways, and some people use consciousness to mean something, other people use awareness to mean the same thing or different things, and so there is no general clear definition. I mean, you look at the dictionary, you'll find about 5 different definitions of what consciousness means. So all I can say is my approach to this is that we actually fall into a bit of a trap when we use a noun here. You see, when we use the word consciousness or awareness, when we add NESS to a word, we're taking that word and saying the state or quality of. So, for example, happiness is the state of being happy, or softness is the quality of being soft. Now, happiness doesn't actually exist as a thing. Being happy definitely exists as an experience. You know, being soft definitely exists as a tactile sensation. But we've generated an abstract noun and we think it's a thing, but there is no thing there. And it's the same with consciousness or awareness. What it really means is the state of being conscious or the state of being aware. And so that is something each of us knows. You know, each of us is aware. We're an aware being. We may be aware of different things. Certainly we are. Each of us is aware of different things. But what we all share is this quality of being aware. And so, you know, the word awareness is really reflecting this very, very basic fact. Is probably the one thing we cannot deny in life, is that we are aware, that we are conscious. And the problem is when you think of it as a noun, as a thing, you start going looking for it, or how does it arise? These sorts of questions. Does it come from the brain? But when you realize all of that thinking and wondering is just another thought or experience that is appearing in our own awareness, that we are aware of. So that's how I see it, as probably it's the undeniable fact of our existence, is that we are aware. So that's what it's referring to. For me, as I say, other people use the words differently, but that's how I see it.
Sure, awareness. And then, do you believe, or do you know that if animals and other sort of creatures are conscious or aware in the same way human beings are?
Not in the same way, but I certainly believe they are aware. I think it's obvious to anybody they are aware. I mean, anybody who's got a pet, you know, and interacts with them, they're clearly aware. They recognize us, you know, they're attending to things. And I often say to people, if you don't think your pet is aware, then, you know, would you ask if it was going to the vet to have surgery, would you expect the vet to give it an anesthetic? And you say, well, of course, because you don't want your pet to feel pain, you know. So, there's an assumption there that the pet would experience pain. So I think we assume other creatures are aware in that sense. They're having an internal world of experience. They're not just biological machines. But the difference is that we are aware of a whole realm that other creatures aren't aware of. And vice versa. I mean, a dog is aware of sounds that we're not aware of, or smells that we're not aware of. But what we're aware of is our own internal process, our own thinking. And that comes from the fact that, you know, we have language, and we use language within our own minds to talk to ourselves, to have conversations, to reason, to work things out. And so the difference is that human beings have this whole other layer in their awareness, which I call thinking. Basically, I don't think other animals think as we do. They don't sort of sit down and work out, if I did this, this would happen, and what's going to happen tomorrow, and should I worry about this, and or what a good time I had yesterday on that walk. I don't think animals do that. They're aware, but they don't have this thinking quality. And this thinking quality is what allows, I think, human beings to be so creative, to make things, design things, to think about the future, to learn from the past. Whereas other animals are just in the present moment. We can delve into the past and into the deep future. So there's a big difference in what we are aware of, but I think all creatures are aware to some extent or other.
Got it. I mean, it's very hard for me to sort of think like an animal, in the sense, just have that first layer of consciousness just to be aware, because I think the differentiating factor from what you're saying is humans are aware that they're aware, right? And that sort of changes everything.
Yes, we're aware that we're aware. And that is, you know, two things. I mean, we both understand that we're aware. You know, we're talking about it now in this conversation where we are understanding that we are aware, but also we have the ability to, in a way, step back from our thinking, to pause that, and just to notice, here I am, to experience being aware, that we can be aware of being aware. And so that's the second way in which we're self-aware. And again, I don't think other creatures do this. But I think we can, I think, taste what it's like to be other creatures when we just sit in the present moment without thinking. You know, we can sit and, you know, look at a beautiful landscape or whatever. we can just sit there and not be thinking about it. And I think we start getting closer to how an animal might experience the environment.
Oh, I see. Okay, so sometimes like when you're caught in a trance maybe and you're focusing on something and you're absorbed in it, it could be something like that.
Yes, yes, or not even in a trance. I think just sitting quietly, um, not thinking about things, letting go of thinking, just being in the present moment, or just noticing your experience, not even thinking about it, but just being aware. Here I am, not even thinking about it, but just noticing your experience of whatever it is, the tree or the wall or whatever, but just being with your experience without getting caught up in a whole internal dialogue about what you're seeing, or even naming it, not even saying, oh, there's tree. It's just being with that raw experience of the color, the shape.
Got it. Okay. And then if in one of your talks, you had a very good example of consciousness and the body or the brain, I think, being a conduit of consciousness, and you compared it to a strip of film. So, a light that shines onto the film is projected, onto a surface. And you were saying that that light is the original source light, of
Mhm.
of our source being. And the body or the brain, I think, was the conduit. So in your work, is the body or the brain required to experience consciousness? I guess maybe as humans we are.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's who knows what our consciousness is without a body, but all that we know of consciousness is coming through our personal experience. Even, obviously the outside world is coming through what we see with our senses or touch or hear. But even if you go, deep into a meditative state where you're not even aware of the outside world, it is still, your experience is still dependent upon what is happening in the brain. So I think it's, I would say probably impossible for us as individuals to have an experience that is not dependent upon what is going on in the body and the brain. And so the way I see it is the, the being conscious is there already. That's fundamental, the being conscious. The brain doesn't create consciousness. The brain doesn't make being conscious happen. Being conscious is there already. And then what the brain does is feed in the experiences that we have. So the brain activity that's going on appears in our being aware as a particular experience. So, taking the tree, the eye is seeing it, it's analyzing it in the brain, and then that experience is something that arises in our awareness.
Got it. Okay. And do you differentiate with the mind and consciousness, or are they both the same thing? Because from speaking with
Right.
some monks, they actually think that it might be the same thing.
Yes, again, there's different people use the words in different ways. So there's no absolute thing.
Yeah.
Uh, the way I use the term is consciousness, as I said, is just referring to the fact that we are aware. And then I use the word mind with a big M. For me, big M, mind, is the totality of what is arising in experience in any given moment, the totality of what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, sensing, thinking, whatever is going on in awareness is the totality of mind, which is much more than the way, we sometimes use mind as the thinking mind as opposed to feeling or whatever. So for me, mind is the totality of what is appearing in consciousness.
Got it. Okay. So it's a subset of consciousness.
It's yes. Well, you talked about the projector analogy with light on a screen. So the way I use that analogy is the light shines through the film, and the film, if you like, shapes the light, conditions the light, filters it, and then you see an image on the screen, which is how the film has shaped, conditioned the light. And I think it's the parallel there is there's the light of consciousness, and then the brain is shaping that consciousness to appear as certain experiences, forms, etc. So the consciousness is the light itself, the light of awareness, and the mind is the forms that it takes on.
Okay, okay, I see. Got it. That's very interesting, because we usually tend to think of the mind and the brain being synonymous with each other, right? I mean, because we're very sort of top heavy. You know, we
Right.
have our eyes for visualization. We're always, you know, looking
Yeah.
closer, you know, from the brain. We tend to think that the mind is up there, but really there's no real location for the mind, right?
Right. That's the way I see it. Yes. The mind, what happens in the mind is clearly dependent upon the brain, but they're not the same thing. For me, the brain is the physical organ in the head, and the mind is the experiences that come out of it.
Got it. Okay. And then when the body dies, I mean, we don't know, or maybe we do. I haven't spoken to that many people. What happens to the consciousness? Because, you know, so far as we know, we need the body to be the conduit of consciousness. So as long as the body's alive, consciousness is alive. But once the body dies, consciousness could either not exist or maybe exist in a different form.
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of different theories out there, lots of different ideas. Some people think they really know what happens. To be honest, I have no idea. It's probably the biggest unknown, and I don't worry about it too much. I mean, you know, for me, the challenge is how do we live and wake up more, become, you know, more better human beings, more compassionate, loving human beings in this life. And then, you know, when this life finishes, we will discover or not what lies beyond.
Yeah. With your studies in India, do you believe in reincarnation?
I don't, but let me be more precise here. I don't believe in it. So I don't, you know, it's not a belief that, oh yes, I believe it happens. Again, I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. So I don't believe in it, but I don't disbelieve in it. Again, there's some very interesting data pointing towards it. So yeah, but I can't say personally.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. And you know, someone, I think it was Paul Chek, who said, you know, he's a person who's done a ton of things. You know, I can, you know, encourage the listeners to check him out on YouTube. And his mother was a yogi, and you know, he studied with yogis, and he studied with Osho, and you know, many people. And he's famous for saying, you know, he studied all the religions. That, you know, say something like Catholicism, that's, you know, religion for children, and then, you know, Hinduism, or, you know, the non-Abrahamic religions, are sort of the Eastern religions. They're more religions for adults. But still, at the end of the day, you know, with the Abrahamic religions, they've sort of, you know, got you covered down here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Eastern religions, they've got you covered up there. So, you know, maybe you should be behaving on both sides. You know?
Yes, yes. Each one has its own particular story. Yeah, I'm more interested, you know, what is behind them all, behind all the different religions, and I think they're all pointing in one way or another to how we can, you know, be free from our, you know, self-centered thinking to become more open, compassionate, loving human beings. And I think that's what we should be focusing on more rather than their differences.
So then, you know, by that regard, if someone came up to you and said, you know, I want to turn a new leaf, I've not been living life according to, you know, my purpose. I've sort of, you know, been weighing heavy into materialistic things. I want to become more conscious, more aware, more spiritual, have more compassion. What would you advise them to do?
In more, you know, with a particular individual, I would explore them more. But in a most general sense, yeah, I would say begin to look within. I think one very basic practice is just to, throughout the day, whenever you think about it, between tasks, like between doing emails and going making a cup of tea or something, whatever it is, just pause for a few seconds. You're already not doing something, you already pause in terms of what you're doing. Whenever you're pausing between tasks, just pause the mind, just pause whatever you're thinking, just choosing not to follow that thought anymore for the moment, and notice how it feels. And what most people notice is when you just pause the thinking for a moment, there's a sense of relaxation, a sense of relief. You may notice a greater sense of inner quietness. You may notice what you're feeling. So you're beginning to notice what's going on inside you, which we don't notice all the time. We're busy doing things, thinking about things. We don't notice these quieter inner qualities of our own self, our own being. And so just by doing that, you're opening up to discovering what is there, discovering more about our own being, our own inner wisdom, what's going on. And that will lead to many other doors. But so I think that's the basic thing, is just choosing to turn the attention within. It's nearly always turned out on some, even when we're thinking, the attention is turned out into the world. We're thinking about something in the world. So just turning the attention 180 degrees round towards yourself is the first step, and then seeing where that leads.
Wow, that's very well said on a number of different facets, because I often feel that when we're born and we're brought up with family and friends and schooling and religion and all these sort of environmental influences, like you're saying, everything is outwards, it's external based. It's almost like this outside magnet that's pulling our attention, our focus. So we never really get to know ourselves. And even when we try to look inward, if our parents don't agree with that, based on their values and beliefs, we're sort of, spoken to about it or scolded, etc. Sometimes even made, to feel ashamed of. So I think that's really important, that we have to go inward. And too often when, we're told to go inward, there's almost a sense of, bringing on meditation, and it becomes very sort of, the analysis paralysis sets in. But I like that you said pause, because pause is just sort of like a brief moment in time, and
Yes.
it starts the momentum of going inward. And also like that you said, don't have a destination in mind, see where it leads, because
Wow.
that consciousness, that spirituality, that source will guide you to wherever
Yeah.
you're supposed to be led, right?
Right. All we're really doing is just allowing the mind to relax. So often the mind is focused on something, there's a tension there, and in pausing, we're just allowing the mind to relax. No, not looking for anything, no agenda, but just being curious as to what happens, how it feels when we pause, what do we discover. So it's a very open approach, no technique, nothing like that.
Was it easy for you to go from a field like science, because I know you did a lot of physics, into meditation, like to cross that road?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a sudden thing. It was a gradual transition. I mean, I loved science. I was a mathematician to begin with, and then moved into theoretical physics, and then into computer science. And I'm still interested in all that area. It's always been there. But I also realized that no amount of science was ever going to show me about consciousness. It may tell me a lot about the brain. I studied the brain for you at one stage, but it wouldn't really answer the fundamental questions about consciousness. I realized the people who really explored consciousness were the people who looked within themselves. You didn't explore consciousness by putting electrodes on the brain. You explore consciousness by diving into your own awareness and seeing what is there. And so these people were the monks, the spiritual adepts who basically, looked within, who meditated and looked within. And so that drew me into looking at meditation and things. At that stage, I had no interest in spirituality. I'd rejected religion. But as I looked more into this, I began to see, as I said just now, there is a common core, I think, to all the great religions. But I'm more interested in not so much, the religious side of it, but just what is that essential spiritual wisdom. So it was a smooth transition. It was something that gradually developed in my life. It wasn't a sudden, Paul on the road to Damascus sort of conversion.
Got it. And it's, I hope we get to a point where science is able to measure consciousness, because I often think that if something's not measured, then it's not true. And that's, I don't personally, think that's the case. There's many instances in my life where, things have happened with the law of attraction and things like that. Or, I'm sure we cannot measure it, but it has happened. And I hope we get to a point where science can measure that, because once we measure things, we gain a better understanding of things. And then we're also better able to control those same things, right?
Yes, I'm not sure though, what would we be measuring? Again, it depends on how we use the word. I mean, for me, as I said, the fact that consciousness reflects the fact that I am aware. And that cannot be measured, but it's something I absolutely know. It doesn't need measurement to prove it. I mean, my own being here, my own experience proves I am aware. So I'm not quite sure what we would be measuring, or if you can measure it. And yet, what I'm saying is it doesn't need measuring, because each of us knows we are aware. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Correct. Yeah.
But
I was thinking
maybe what we can measure is the effects of how we evolve inwardly. We can maybe measure how, our changed psychology, our egocentricity, our compassion, those sorts of things we may measure, which what we're measuring there is the results of a spiritual awakening. But I don't think we can measure consciousness itself.
Okay, so it doesn't have any sort of physical fundamental sort of structure to be measured, right? No. So maybe that's the reason for that is consciousness is quote unquote God, right?
Yes, we're getting into a whole other area here, but I mean, the great mystics and awakened people who've delved into their own experience have realized that deep down we are all the same. Deep down we're all that same quality of just pure being, pure I am. And I think that's often led them to, if they're in a culture which has a sort of monotheistic background, then they might well interpret that as, I have, connected with God, or I am God, or I have witnessed God, or whatever. So I think that's how people have interpreted that experience of just being with the peace and love that is their own essential being. So I think there is something there, but I'm not sure that we can actually measure consciousness, that it can be measured, or because what I was saying earlier, the being conscious is something we all know. It's fundamental to our being, and we know it's true, but I don't think there's nothing to actually measure. I think when we're talking about measuring consciousness, we may be talking about measuring the effects of, say, becoming more awake. Like we may be able to measure the changes in the body that come from being more awake, or changes in our social behavior or creativity, that sort of thing. But I don't think consciousness itself is measurable, because that assumes that consciousness is actually part of the physical world in some way or another to be measured. Whereas it's really the opposite. All we know about the physical world is appearing in our consciousness. Everything we know is an experience we are having in consciousness. So I don't think it can be measured. It's beyond measurement, but it doesn't need to be measured, because it is that which we know for sure.
Which we already know, yes. So we should put faith in that, and get confidence that we're already experiencing consciousness. And
we are conscious. We're not experiencing. We are consciousness.
We are consciousness. Got it. And if I can just ask you finally, you've worked with physics, now you've worked with spirituality. I'm glad you're part of some work that's fusing the two together. They say that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Now, in some of the, the religious works, they talk about, in the beginning there was nothing, and then, there was the word of God, or, etc. There was sound, and then the world came essentially from nothing. So there's these two polar opposites, nothing into something. But then I often reflect that there's always been everything, and there's no such thing as nothing. And that actually scares me, that, there's no starting point of nothing, and then even if there was, nothing should be something. What are your thoughts on that? Do you ever thought about that, or?
Again, if we get into sort of religious stories, they tend to be more either symbolic or mythological. Either way, I don't think we should take them literally. It's true in physics, energy cannot be created or destroyed, and we clearly have a world that exists. But what is there's actually some modern theories in physics which say, yes, it did come out of nothing, and when you add it all up, all the different, when you add the whole universe up, all the different entities, etc., it comes back to nothing. It all cancels out. But it's like, it's manifested and it appears that all these differences, but it all cancels out. It's a bit like, I mean, the closest analogy I can think of is you have a bank which has zero money in it, but then what it does is it prints some money and gives that out to people, and then they have money, but then there's a debt in the bank, which is given it out. And so the money's circulating, doing good work, whatever, or bad work. And then when you pay the bank back, it all comes back to zero. So it's like difference in the world has been created out of nothing. But ultimately, when you do the final accounting, it all comes back to nothing.
Wow. And, for me personally, I guess it's easier for me to fathom something, but it's not easy to imagine nothing.
Right. It's impossible. Yeah.
And we have to maybe, reach that level of understanding or thinking to be able even to get into that.
Yeah.
But listen, I mean, thanks so much once again for coming on the episode. It was very nice talking to you. And if people want to get a hold of you or check out more of your work, where's the best place to reach you for that?
My website, which is peterrussell.com. And Russell is spelled RUSSELL, 2 L's on Russell, else you end up somewhere else. So peterrussell.com with 2 L's.
And I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Great.
And thanks again, Peter. It was very good talking to you.
Yeah. Okay. Take care. Bye.